This month, a 10-year-old African American girl. This month, a 10-year-old African American girl with autism committed suicide. And though suicide and mental illness are often thought of as a white phenomenon, over the past generation, a mental health crisis has been brewing among Black youth. A crisis that very few people, including Black families, have spoken about publicly. Today, we're asking experts why and what can we do to save our kids. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Isabella, a pretty 10-year-old Black autistic student in Utah, died by suicide 2 weeks, literally just 2 weeks ago. And this happened after her family said she was bullied by classmates, including being called the N-word repeatedly. Her family said they complained about the bullying, but their complaints were ignored. The Department of Justice found that Isabella's school district had a disturbing pattern of ignoring complaints of bullying of African American and Asian students. Sadly, what happened to Isabella is not an aberration. A 2018 study found that while the suicide rate of Black children 5 to 12 years old was low, it was nearly twice that of white children. And that from 2013 to 2019, the suicide rate of Black boys and men from 15 to 24 rose by an alarming 47%, and 59% for Black girls and women of the same age. The researcher who was the first to document the rising trend of suicide rates of Black teens is here this morning. I want to welcome to the show Dr. Michael Lindsey. He's the executive director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty, Policy, and Research at New York University, where he studies the mental health of Black adolescents. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Lindsey. Yeah, it's the holidays, and we know for some, this is a period, Dr. Lindsey, where, people are celebrating and lots of people are happy, but we also know the holidays can be incredibly difficult for individuals who suffer from mental health issues. And I just want to ask you first about Isabella. I'm a mother of a son who's on the autism spectrum, so this story hit me so hard in so many different ways. One, a little girl, I have two daughters. Second, she's on the spectrum. I have a son on the spectrum. And then she's just this beautiful kid. How did hearing that story about 10-year-old Isabella strike you as a professional that does this for a living, studies these issues for a living? Yeah, and that's what I think when I hear these numbers about this rising, increase of the studies that have looked at suicide rates from dating back to the 1991. I'm thinking, how could a kid, Dr. Lindsey, feel that level of despair, that they think, I don't want to keep living. I mean, we think of suicide, and I think you were quoted as saying it's kind of a white phenomenon, one that doesn't even happen in the Black community. And then you definitely don't think about it happening to babies. You're dispelling that myth. So go ahead, tell us why this isn't just about white kids or white people, that this is happening in our very own community. Mm.
Related to accessing those services, whether it's related to a stigma related to having depression or mental illness, or it relates to stigma regarding going to a professional for help. There's often been a misinterpretation of symptoms. We have treated Black and brown kids, particularly in the school context, with suspensions and expulsions from schools, as opposed to providing behavioral health and support for them. And finally, in the case of this young lady you're talking about, I think increasingly we're seeing more and more racialized bullying that has had an effect on kids in a negative way. And I think that the combination of those factors are really pointing to why we're seeing these rising trends.
And, Dr. Lindsey, some of the work that you've done, you looked at the increase in suicide attempts. Mm-hmm. So attempts versus even kids who, were unfortunately successful in taking their lives. How are kids attempting to commit suicide? Like, what mechanism are they using?
Well, actually, we just completed a study, and it was led by Ariel Sheftal, a really great colleague of mine at Ohio State University. I was one of the co-authors. And what we found is that there actually may be an age difference in terms of how youth are attempting suicide. So for the younger kids, it seems to be characterized by hanging, suffocation, and I'm talking about kids under the 12 and under. And for kids older than that, it seems that increasingly firearms have been associated with their suicide attempts.
Wow. And are these kids, Dr. Lindsey, kids who have pre-diagnosed mental health issues? So, I'm a disability rights advocate, so I know I've been in a lot of schools. I've been, with kids with IEPs, and I know that Black kids oftentimes get labeled as having emotional disturbance. Right. Not necessarily a medical diagnosis, but a term used in schools to trigger certain services that are provided through, the IEP process. That's so right. Are the kids that you guys are looking at in these studies, are these kids who have either that school determination of having emotional disturbance, or they've been clinically diagnosed with some kind of, mental health, disorder?
Yeah. So in our recent study, again, I want to give a shout out to Ariel Sheftal, who was the lead author on the study. We found that kids who were 12 and under actually had a diagnosis of ADHD that seemed to be associated with their suicide. And then for kids who are older than 12 years old, it seems to be the case that depression, all of the depression disorders, so major depression, dysthymic disorder, are all associated with suicide for the more older adolescents in terms of their teenage years.
But are these, I know when you all did the study, so you found that these kids already had been diagnosed with either ADHD or, so were they kids in treatment? Were these kids who, they have this diagnosis, were they in some form of treatment?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And we don't know that level of detail. It's one of the limitations of the study. But I would surmise that at some level, if they had a diagnosis, then there may have been intermittent treatment, no consistent treatment. And so there's then this sort of warning sign that we all should be paying attention to, which is that if a kid is struggling with any behavioral health or mental health concern, we should get them into treatment early, often, and persist with that treatment until there's resolution of the issues.
So let's talk about what some of those warning signs are, Dr. Lindsey, because I can imagine a lot of parents are sitting here, we use the word depression, we use anxiety, but, those are big clinical terms.
That's right.
So what does the everyday parent who doesn't have, your background, your training, Dr. Shetfield's training, what should they be looking for?
So, Areva, I think that one clear sign, and I say this wherever I go, in terms of talking to professionals or families, whomever it may be, right? One clear sign that a kid could be experiencing some level of distress, undiagnosed mental health concerns, is when you see a change in functioning. So, for example, if your kid was making great grades in school and doing well socially, academically, and all of a sudden you saw a downward trend in terms of their academic and social functioning, that's a warning sign that you should delve deeper into what might be causing that, sort of digression in terms of grade and social performance. I also think that, we should be looking for changes in terms of whether a kid wants to do their chores or they want to be isolated more. I think that, we should be engaging them about why they want to be isolated or why they are not doing their chores. So a change in functioning is really, really important and gives us an opportunity to explore how their children might be feeling. Oftentimes we will ask kids, how are you doing? Without really exploring their feelings and giving them the opportunity to share how they're feeling, what things bothered them during the course of the day, what things worry them, so that we can engage them around those feelings and connect them to services if they need that further support.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Dr. Lindsey, having parented 3 teens. So when you say ask kids how they're feeling, when they get to be teenagers, they ain't talking to you. They're not responding.
Yeah. Well,
you take that one word, fine, good, that's it.
Right. And so then, Areva, that's an opportunity to explore more. Tell me what makes you feel good. Tell me what makes you feel fine, and really get them to explore their feelings. So I did a study some years ago with Black youth. And one of the things that I found, and they all were experiencing some mental health challenges. And one of the things that astonished me in terms of the findings is that these Black youth said that they actually want their caregivers and loved ones to engage them around their feelings. Sometimes they will actually quite literally close up so that, those who love them can reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? And engage them around their feelings. I think more and more it's important to really help them to put into words what means good, what means fine, and to really get them in a place where they're comfortable with bringing their feelings and how they're doing beyond just defining good to their caregivers, so that they can have a deeper dialogue about the things that are going on in their lives.
And okay, that's great. I'm going to call my kids after this show and tell them that Dr. Lindsey said I need to get you to open up more. But how then, Dr. Lindsey, do we go from listening to how they're feeling to getting them into therapy? Because we know in the Black community, there is stigma associated with therapy and mental health treatment. And a lot of these parents who are going to be these investigators of sort themselves don't necessarily believe in therapy as the way to address some of these issues. So how do we make that connection?
So I'm going to relieve a lot of parents out there of pressure and say that in our society, we need to do better about checking in with respect to our mental health. You know, it strikes me that we get all kinds of messaging around it's important to go to the doctor to get your annual health visit and checkup. And we don't say anything about our behavioral or emotional health. And so, you know, we can do better in our society about going into the behavioral health supports and getting those kinds of services that might be helpful. I think that we can sort of dispel any sort of fears or anxiety just by accompanying our child to those services and allowing them to see that we're going to be with them side by side, that this is something that they're not taking on their own, but this is a family matter that we're looking into. And even family therapy is supportive to kids in the process. I never worked with a kid as a clinician in isolation of the family. So it wasn't about, a family bringing this sort of quote unquote bad kid into the treatment, and we're working with that kid in isolation of the family. So I think it's important then for families to realize that this is an opportunity for the unit to come together and get the support that they need. And it's not on the kids themselves alone, in terms of seeking the treatment and supports that they might need.
No, that's really great advice. And I love how you talk about in terms of this being something for the entire family unit to participate in, because probably mama and daddy could use some therapy too.
That's right. That's right.
Most of us can.
We all can. We all can.
Yes.
Yeah. Every one of us, for the person who says, I have everything together, I'm all good, I don't need therapy, that's the first person that should be in line for some support.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lindsey, for your time. Thank you for the great work you're doing. Thank you for making this such a big issue. I know one of the things you're hoping comes out of these studies is that more dollars, research dollars, move, from the federal government into research institutions, into, institutes like yours, so that these studies can be done more comprehensively, more robustly, and that we can, start to figure out how we get to our kids before they get to the point of feeling so hopeless and such feelings of despair. So any last thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I know that's a big...
No, you said it, Areva. We have been involved, my colleagues here at the McSilver Institute, a national panel of experts that was convened by the Congressional Black Caucus. We worked on a report, Ring the Alarm, the Crisis of Black Youth Suicide in America, that then became the basis of the Pursuing Equity in Mental Health Act that was sponsored by Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. And actually in the House, it was well received in terms of bipartisan support. So Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman and Congressman John Katko from New York both sponsored this bill that actually passed in the House of Representatives by a margin of 247 to 49. I believe, in March of this year. And now there's a Senate version of that bill that is being sponsored by Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. And we're hopeful that the Senate also passes this bill so that it reaches the president, and hopefully the president will sign it.
And just real quickly, Dr. Lindsey, what does the bill do?
So the bill calls for greater research dollars to NIMH and other institutes, federal institutes that focus on research to really address this issue, because, Areva, while we know that there have been rising trends, we are somewhat anecdotal in terms of why we've seen these trends. And so we really need to document so that we can get services, corrected in the ways that they need to be so that we can really address this issue. It also calls for greater attention to training teachers and other school personnel, family members, on what the signs and symptoms of a kid who might be at risk are, so that we can get them into services early and often. It also calls for more behavioral health professionals, particularly behavioral health professionals of color, to come into the profession so that we can create greater pipelines for professionals of color to be in this space and this work. Because we know sometimes families may want to talk to a Black therapist, and that therapist is not available. And so we want to see more and more professionals of color come into this space of work so that kids and families have, greater access to someone who looked like them.
Right. And that's the McSilver Institute that you're a part of. It's been a part of leading this charge as it relates to addressing this issue. Thank you for your work. We're going to keep an eye on what happens to that bill in the Senate. Hopefully, as you said, it will get passed, will make its way to the president's desk. and get
Yes.
signed into law, because obviously much needed services, research dollars, and support for families, really important. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Lindsey. Really appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much.
Doing
Thank
that
you so much.
groundbreaking work.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, my next guest is Sheri Crawley. She is the founder and executive director of Pretty Brown Girl, and this is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the health and wellness of Black and brown girls around this country. She's joined by one of the participants in her program. It's a young student. Her name is Dee, and she's in the Louisville, Kentucky chapter. Good morning, Sheri. Good morning, Dee.
Good morning, Areva. Thank you for having us.
Hi, Dee. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Well, before I ask you some questions, Dee, first I want to ask Sheri. Sheri, tell us about this organization. I've read so many incredible things about it. It seems like you guys are on fire. So tell us what Pretty Brown Girl is and what you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much. I first of all, I can't even take full credit of Pretty Brown Girl. It was an assignment. And I know a lot of us right now, especially women, are looking to be on the other side of purpose. So Pretty Brown Girl was answered prayer through my own two daughters' experiences when they were 4 and 5. They're teenagers now. But when my daughters were 4 and 5 years old, we relocated from Chicago back to Detroit, which is where I'm originally from. And my daughters went from being in all Black middle class schools to being the only Black girls in their classroom. Mm-hmm. And I could immediately see their self-esteem just dwindle overnight, even though they were, 10 levels above the next child, just not wanting me to leave them, wanting Pantene shampoo if they saw a commercial, thinking it would make their hair long and blonde like their classmates. And then it was ultimately a party that I planned for my daughters at a popular doll store where the only Black doll was a freed slave. Let me just leave it with that. Mm-hmm. So my husband and I came, and that doll is still being sold today, in 2021. But it was my husband that saw as a Black father, the importance of uplifting his girls. And one day I heard him wake them up in the morning as we're going through and navigating through these circumstances. Good morning, my pretty brown girls. And that just resonated with my spirit when I heard him say that. And I Googled it. There was nothing but pornography, Areva, on the other side of that Google search in 2010. And we launched this doll thinking we'd be like the people on Shark Tank and add positive spin to Black girls. But God had a whole nother agenda for us. And now we've had over 30,000 girls go through our after school programs throughout the country, but also hundreds of thousands of girls and women be a part of our movement where we're advocating on behalf of all of the needs of Black and brown girls. And
so you, Sheri, had an opportunity to meet Dee. Tell us how you met Dee and how did she become a participant in the program?
Listen, Dee is amazing. Dee is a part of our Louisville chapter where we all know what's, gone on in Louisville, especially as it relates to Breonna Taylor, her, tragic murder. And I met Dee during our launch. We started in the middle of the pandemic where all of this uncertainty and vulnerability are going on with our young people. And Dee was just very vocal about the things that she was feeling about being marginalized as a Black girl, but finding her voice within our program. So the girls meet with us once a week. And it's just she really excited me with her enthusiasm and how she's come out of her shell even more so. And, just helping us to be able to build that sisterhood with girls. They need that safe space for their voice to be heard and to know that, like my mother used to say, who they are and whose they are. So we come in like the cool aunts that we are and make sure that we get them together, make sure they're all right, and be able to make sure that they have their roadmap of success.
So Dee, tell us, she said you were quiet and shy, but Sheri said you found your voice. What was it for you? Did you have like this aha moment when you said, hey, I want to talk and I want to speak up about what I'm seeing in my school or in my community?
Well, I wasn't quiet and shy. When I first joined the club itself, I was quiet and shy.
Okay.
But when I saw the energy in the room coming from the other girls, I was like, okay, maybe this is a place where I could actually be myself. And so I started to open up a little bit more and share my opinions on the things that we talked about and discussed.
Dee, you're 13, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm thinking about all the things that 13-year-olds do today, and a lot of it is spend time on the internet. Is that your experience and the experience of most of your friends where you guys are on either TikTok or Instagram or, one of these social media sites, spending a lot of time?
Well, can you elaborate on that?
Well, I'm just saying, you're on social media, right?
I don't have it.
Oh, you're not? Okay. How about your friends? Or any of them on any of the like popular social media sites like TikTok or Instagram?
Yes.
Okay. And what do they say? Because there's some studies out there that show that teen girls look at the like pictures on social media and that makes them feel bad about themselves. Have you had any friends say that to you?
During our meetings in Pretty Brown Girl, I do think that a lot of us were able to relate to that because even though I don't have it, I still do sometimes see pictures and videos. And sometimes it is kind of triggering for insecurities to see a lot of people just kind of sometimes body shaming or simply just not being true to themselves and spreading what needs to be spread. And so a lot of us sometimes feel like maybe we're not doing the right thing. Maybe we're not doing what we need to do to be able to, see, because all those girls that we see on the internet, they're always looking so happy, so cool, so, so interesting. And we also want to be like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like when you can't be like other people, you feel like you're left out of the mix.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, Dee. And that's what all these studies show is that they look at young girls, look at these images of perfect people, and then it makes them feel like somehow they're not perfect or there's something's wrong with them because they don't look as happy or as perfect as these girls. I'll ask you, Sheri, what's the goal? So when Dee and other students join your after school program, what are they in for? What does the program look like?
Well, just like us as, older Pretty Brown Girls, as Black women, we need to be able to connect with each other. And Pretty Brown Girl, we're blessed that is one of the very few platforms nationally where it's just about the girls. Because if we don't give them that roadmap, then they can, end up as broken women. So we want to make sure that we start from the beginning and give them the ability to dream big, to tap into their greatness, to be able to have leadership skills, to know how to show up, in the world, and to be able to know that they're not alone. So Pretty Brown Girl was really not born out of a boardroom. It was born out of needs from girls saying, you know what, everybody thinks we're okay and we're not okay. And as you spoke earlier, and as Dr. Lindsey spoke about probing for deeper meaning when they just say, all right, all the time, but just uncovering in those layers to really getting to the heart of what's happening in their lives. Because my biggest fear as a parent was getting to this age where my daughters are, 15 and 16 now, and hearing about war stories that they went through without me there to navigate because I didn't take the time to go through with them. So that is really the journey of self-discovery. Our girls are confused about who they are and identity and their friends and toxic relationships and everything in between, stress, anxiety, all of that was already coming to a head. And then the pandemic just really set everything, even more on fire with being a 15-year-old and not knowing if you can even go to prom or, seeing people under a mask. So we're excited to be standing in the gap, as I would say, for our girls and for the community.
Dee, one of the things that, parents always struggle with is trying to get their kids to talk and to share with them how they're feeling. What is it that you think, you and other girls in your cohort, your class, this group want parents to know about how you're feeling?
So I feel like sometimes, a lot of times, parents don't know how to react if we open up to them. And so I feel like maybe there are some times where not opening up is probably the best thing for us to do at the moment. And then there are also certain times where, opening up is what we need, but we just don't want to express that. And so I feel like maybe sometimes parents could be gentle. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes you might express something and parents being a whole nother generation, they don't understand. Mm-hmm. And so maybe being gentle, trying your best to show that you're trying to understand and caring rather than, replying or saying something that might make your child not want to, open up to you again. I feel like that's a big something that parents should work on and try their best to do, because if we feel like you're not listening to us or you're dismissing how we feel, we're not going to want to open up to you again. So,
no, that's an excellent point. And that word gentle, I love that, Dee. What are you getting out of Pretty Brown Girl, Dee? And what do you like so much about the program?
I'm getting a lot out of it. It's fun. As I said before, I like the energy. I made that clear. I established that during meetings that I love the energy in the room. It's like we're all different. Like before we joined the clubs, half of us didn't know each other. But when we started, within the first 2 weeks, 2 meetings of it, we felt like, we'd known each other for years and months and stuff like that. We talked about things that a lot of people wouldn't, be able to handle talking about or discussing. We were able to, there were sometimes things that were said that might be insensitive, but we would always, we would always sit there and talk it out, try to understand where each person's coming from. Like our mentor, Miss Porter, she leads the groups of the meet. She leads the meeting groups. And she made it very clear at the beginning of the meetings that there's no hate here, no hating, no rudeness. We're not being rude to each other. Someone says something wrong, you calm yourself down and you talk it out. The entire point of the group is talking it out, being clear with each other, sharing our opinion, just voicing who we are and how we feel about things.
Dee, real quickly, give me an example of a topic that you said, gets talked about in these meetings that you think may not be talked about someplace else.
We talked about a lot of toxic relationships. We talked about toxic relationships. We talked about how toxic relationships aren't just between husband and wife and boyfriend, girlfriend. They're also between family members and friends as well. And even yourself, you can also have a toxic relationship with yourself. There's we talked about toxic relationships and we started discussing, examples of toxic relationships that we've seen on TV or in general or within, our friend groups or at school or at home, and kind of, pointed out patterns of what leads to toxic relationships and signs of toxic relationships and what people do in toxic relationships, kind of manipulation, abuse, things like that. And so I think a lot of people are not able to handle I feel like social media has kind of normalized toxic relationships. You'll see someone posting something saying, I'm toxic and I know it, but I don't care, and stuff like that. It's like, well, being toxic is a cool thing, but it's been normalized by the community and society, and it's becoming something that even though it shouldn't be normalized, is apparently normal. People do talk about it and, make it clear that toxicity is not normal.
Yeah.
But then there are people who joke about it, play around with it. You'll see people struggling with toxic relationships, but, other people making fun of them or just not being sympathetic.
Yeah. Dee, have you guys talked about depression and suicide amongst Black teens?
We did talk about depression and suicide. We talked about, emotional well-being and mental health as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Dee, I know you're 13, but I feel like I'm talking to the next president of the United States or something. I'm listening to all these big, I'll call them LSAT words, GRE words, SAT words. There are all these big words that you have to know, right? Right, Sheri? When you're taking one of these big tests going into graduate school, you already got them down at 13. And I don't know what your career plans are. I don't know, what you're thinking of being, but I just want you to know whatever it is, you're going to be it. I already see it. I see your future and it looks really, really bright.
But wait, Areva, I have to interject because Dee, as soon as she learned about you in the interview, immediately she said she wants to be a civil rights attorney. So, hey.
Hey, well, I'm just listening. I hate to call people articulate because it's gotten such a pejorative, frame to it. But when I say this lovingly as Aunt Areva. You are incredibly well-spoken, poised, so articulate, just so amazing. It's been my honor and pleasure to meet you. I love what you're doing. And Sheri, first tell us where because I know parents are out there thinking, how can I get my daughter in Pretty Brown Girl so she can go on and do an interview and sound like Dee? So where can we find this amazing organization?
Yes, we are about all things empowerment for Black and Brown girls. They can find us on prettybrown.com. That will lead them right to our interest form. Right now, we are vendors with most school districts across the country. So our primary point of contact is through schools as an in-service or after-school program, and everything is virtual now, so any school can join. And but they can have resources and information. And every February, Areva, we do International Pretty Brown Girl Day, where everyone anywhere can help and join with us in celebrating girls of color.
Wow. Well, congratulations, Sheri, on that, thought that came to you. Thank you to your husband. Thank you to your daughters who were inspirational for you in starting this organization. And again, thank you, Dee. We're going to watch you. We're going to see you, just light the world up and continuing to light the world up with your poise and your insights. Really appreciate spending some time with you this morning. And we'll be in touch, Sheri. I want to learn more about this organization. So
absolutely would love to do some things together. And thank you for inviting us.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right. My next guest is from my college, University of Chicago. So I'm always excited when I talk to African-American women who are working at this college because it's not known for its diversity. But I'm excited to have with us now Dr. Janelle Goodwill. She is a professor at the University of Chicago in the School of Social Work. Her research focuses on mental health, race, and suicide. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Goodwill.
Hi, Areva. Thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah. You heard Dee. I mean, what do we say when we see a 13-year-old like that? So poised, so insightful, and who's opening up and talking about toxic relationships. And I love when she said, not just between husband and wife or friend and friend, but even toxic relationships that you have with yourself. Is what Dee is doing and Sheri with Pretty Brown Girl, is that going to be the solution, one solution to helping us address these high suicide rates amongst Black teens?
I certainly think so. And it was the words that come to me when hearing Dee speaker, hope and encouraging. I think it was just very inspiring to hear someone so young have such a mature outlook on the ways that we can best serve young Black and brown girls. And so I really enjoyed hearing from her. And I think one takeaway that really hit me from hearing Dee speak was when she talked about parents being gentle with their girls and with their children. And I really appreciate her language of the word gentle, because I think it speaks to what Dr. Lindsey was mentioning earlier about the need for really a comprehensive or family-based approach to mental health service utilization and suicide prevention with Black youth. I think really being able to reach the entire family unit, not just the child or the youth, but the entire family unit will be really important in terms of trying to mitigate these adverse mental health outcomes in Black youth.
So I know Dr. Lindsey said we need a lot more research, a lot more, time on task to really come up with some definitive reasons why we are seeing these increases, in suicide rates amongst Black girls and boys and teens. But through your research, do you have any insights into what's driving these numbers?
Well, I think the problem is that it's very complex. Research has shown that when someone is suicidal or attempts suicide, it's typically not just one thing. There's not just one root cause that's driving this. It's typically really a culmination of events that are making someone feel so hopeless, so full of despair that they really believe that ending their life is the best option. And so aside from the really important points that Dr. Lindsey mentioned earlier, I think another critical factor to consider, and I think something that, as an alum of University of Chicago that you'll be mindful of as well, is really the access in terms of having community-based mental health resources. Mm-hmm. A lot of the interventions that have been done around suicide prevention have been offered to youth and families who go to the ER, who go to a psychiatric unit. But as was discussed earlier, those are places where we don't have access, where a lot of times Black families and Black youth may not have the resources or access to go to a hospital that's far away from where they live. They may not have insurance or ability to participate in those sort of interventions. And so aside from all the things that were mentioned earlier, I think that really mental health service utilization and really thinking about creative ways to reach young people before they even become suicidal, perhaps through a school-based intervention to really build a culture of promotion, I think would be really helpful in trying to identify some of these root causes.
And Dr. Goodwill, is there any research out there that helps us understand why the rate of increase is greater among girls than it is among Black boys? What is that about?
Well, I want to share some insights from research that's been done over the span of 30 years. So a lot of people may not know this, but suicide has really been the third leading cause of death for Black males ages 15 to 24 since the 1980s. There's a Black researcher who was at UC Berkeley for many years. Her name is Joelle Taylor Gibbs. And we could pull her research studies from 1988, 1989, where she was raising this really important point and noting that suicide was a leading cause of death among Black boys at that time. Since then, we've seen an increase in suicides among Black boys and girls, and typically the number of suicides has been higher among Black boys. What Dr. Lindsey mentioned and the team that he's been working with, particularly with the scholars at Nationwide Children's Hospital, Jeffrey Bridge and Ariel Shefdahl, they've been really important in finding this recent increase among Black girls. So just to clarify, suicide among Black males and Black boys has been going on for a long time. That's been a leading cause of death since the 80s. However, what's been a recent change is the number of suicides among young Black children, so those 5 to 12, like you mentioned early on, and then also the suicides among Black girls. In terms of reasons why, and I think with Black boys and even with adult men, we would see that access to a firearm greatly increases one's chance of dying by suicide. The lethality of that particular method is particularly harmful versus someone who maybe attempts suicide by hanging or doing an overdose. There's a greater likelihood that they could be revived from that. I think this increase among girls is particularly complex because it's new. We haven't seen it before, but I think it does point to perhaps the way that Black women and Black girls are treated, are perceived, are overlooked, are underappreciated in our society. And I think what Dr. Lindsey mentioned early on about the public killings and murders of Black people that we see online is certainly a contributor that needs to be addressed further.
And we know we've seen these studies, Dr. Goodwill, about Instagram. And the Instagram studies are specifically related to the mental health of teen girls, not just Black teen girls, but teen girls in general. And obviously, inside documents that establish that Facebook, the owner of Instagram, knows that Instagram in particular, more so than Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, other sites, but Instagram in particular leads to these comparisons of girls. And we heard Dee say that people in her group talk about looking at these images of the so-called perfect life. Mm-hmm. And then feeling less than, feeling like you're not good enough because you don't have the quote unquote perfect life. What advice can you give parents who have teen girls who are on these sites and may want to be on them, obviously because their friends are on them, they want to connect, they want to share pictures, they want to share stories about their life, but there's documented evidence that this is harmful to girls, teens' mental health.
Yes, well, I think this is really challenging because the evidence is mixed. It's inconclusive, really, in terms of the long-term and longitudinal effects of social media use and teen mental health. Now, there have been a lot of studies around social media use, Instagram use, TikTok use, and teen mental health, but there have been very few, and I'm not sure of any researchers that have conducted those studies only among Black youth. And I think that is a serious issue that we run into a lot in this field of research, which is why Dr. Lindsey's point about getting more research dollars will be so important, because some of the trends that we see, I think, among a general population may be different, maybe either exacerbated or maybe even be different among a sample of Black teens. And so when looking at existing studies, some of the longitudinal data that's been measured over 5-10 years has shown that Instagram use is not always linked to long-term mental health outcomes. It is oftentimes associated with how youth are feeling in the moment or feeling right now, but the evidence for long-term impacts is complicated. Now, one important area that I would encourage parents to be mindful of is to really think about and explore some of the recent studies that have focused on the content that young people focus and post on Instagram. So I would say it's not necessarily about the screen time. We haven't seen screen time be linked to worse mental health outcomes. It's the content that young people post. So on Instagram, there's been some studies where researchers have found that young people are posting about self-harm, about cutting, about experiencing suicidal ideation in the moment. And those are things that I think parents and researchers and clinicians alike can really monitor to ensure that those services are being made available to young people immediately. So again, I don't think that it's just the screen time. I think it's the content that parents would need to monitor to ensure that their kids are not the ones who are posting these really harmful images about self-harm, cutting, or even reporting that they're experiencing suicide ideation through a post on their Instagram feed.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that parents know that there are suicide, hotlines, there are links, there are crisis centers that they can contact, and we're showing a slide of a suicide prevention lifeline where people can call no matter where you are in the country. And I asked Dr. Lindsey about some of those warning signs, Dr. Goodwill, and he said that change in behavior, some change that you may note in your child's behavior. But is there anything else that we should be looking for as parents, as school teachers, as community leaders that, should trouble us, that may be a cry for help that says we should we should seek out some professional help?
Well, I think, and this may not be a popular point of view, but I think that really it could be beneficial for parents to seek help before there's even a problem. So before a young person even reports experiencing suicide ideation, I think just as a preventative measure in an attempt to build a culture of prevention, I think it would be worthwhile and helpful to just utilize the services made available to us wherever we may be, whether that's in a school, in a church, in a community-based setting. Again, I live and work on the South Side of Chicago, so I recognize that those resources are not always as readily accessible as we need them to be. But I would encourage parents to take advantage of whatever is available to you at that point, which oftentimes at this point may be coming through school. In terms of additional warning signs, I'm doing some recent research now looking at a sample of youth across the nation at different depression symptoms that they're experiencing while also reporting suicide ideation. And aside from all the great things that have already been mentioned, we're seeing, I think, some concerning trends around changes in sleep patterns, whether sleeping too much or sleeping too little, changes in weight, gaining weight or losing weight, changes in interest, like was mentioned earlier, also feeling particularly withdrawn or lethargic. I think it's important to note that some young people may not report the typical external sort of symptoms that we would expect, maybe like depression or crying, but internally they may begin to feel very withdrawn and remove themselves from activities. So I think paying attention to some of these psychosomatic sort of symptoms could be an important step for parents to think about as well.
Well, I love what you said about developing a culture of taking preventive measures.
Yes.
And maybe families thinking about that dental checkup that you get yearly, or
exactly.
that, physical that you get yearly, also doing a yearly mental health visit to a mental health professional. I think that's such great advice. And that obviously will start to help, break down some of the stigma that African-American families have around seeking mental health counseling and support. Thank you so much, Dr. Goodwill, for your work. Thank you for being, an important presence on the South Side of Chicago, which has a predominantly, minority African-American, demographic. Really glad to see you at the University of Chicago doing such important work. Diversity matters and representation matters. So again, thank you for joining us on this really important topic this morning.
Thank you so much. And I really believe exactly what you're doing is going to help and aid as we're working to really change our perspective as a people, as a culture around mental health service youth, help seeking, and all of those things. The fact that this would be made available to people who don't have insurance, but maybe they have Facebook and they'll be able to watch this and they'll learn more. That is exactly what we need. And us as researchers being able to partner with folks who have platforms like you, I think will really lead to such an important change so that we can have our young people not just survive, but to really thrive and live into adulthood and live lives full of meaning and purpose. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your attention to this important topic.
Well, no, that's a great point. And that's a reason why we do the special report, is because lots of folks are watching cable news and network news, but there are lots of people who are not. And they're getting all their news and all their information from Facebook and other social media sites. And we wanted to be able to give them a place where they could be trusted information from experts like yourself, top experts in the field, various fields, but where they can get real facts, real information. So we couldn't do this without folks like you. So again, thank you for joining me this morning. All right. My next guest is Cory Minor. She's an attorney. She's a mental health advocate and author of #Driven. You've seen her on the show before, and I'm excited to welcome her back to the show. Cory Minor is with us again. Good morning, Cory.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being such an incredible advocate on this topic. And, I thought about you when we were putting this together. We were so excited to be able to have Dee join us and have the professionals, but you're someone who has your own compelling story of dealing with mental health. So I thought you'd be perfect to just kind of talk briefly. I'm running out of time, but I did want to get you to address this whole stigma issue.
Yes.
I had a young man that I interviewed about 2 weeks ago on my radio show, and his best friend had just committed suicide. And he was at the church service speaking for his friend. And he said the pastor got up and said, basically, everything that guy just said, don't listen to. If you have a mental health issue, all you need to do is pray and come to the altar and Jesus will take care of it. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that was essentially the message. And he was so disturbed by that. It caused him to go out and create his own. He's a current NFL player, and he wanted to create a mental health organization because he saw his mom was a mental health professional. He knew that there is a role for professionals and that oftentimes Black folks are getting these mixed messages from church. So how do we deal with those messages? Because they can be pretty powerful.
Yes, they can. And thank you, Areva, for having me on today. This is a powerful segment. I've listened in on all of those that you had. Great information. And most importantly is the fact that we're talking about it. I think it was said earlier, but we have to get past misinformation. One being that Black people don't commit suicide. We do. And we need to understand and know that there are ways to prevent it. So yes, we are very spiritual people, very religious people, and we rely heavily on the words of our pastors and our spiritual leaders. But it's important for us to know that God doesn't give us more than we can bear. And however you interpret that is meaning for me, I interpret it is we have resources available. Yes, we can pray. Yes, we can leave things at the altar, but we also have professionals who went to school, who were gifted by God as well to help us with problems that we would have as humans. So it's important for us to continue to talk about these issues and to know that help is available. We just have to be willing to accept the help and to receive the help and not be worried and caring about other people talking about our business, because we want high quality of life. We want our children to have high quality of life, and we need to do whatever we can to do that, regardless of what anyone has to say about it.
And, I'm glad you said that, talking about our business, because in a lot of the reports that I've been reading to get ready for today's show, that came up often with the mental health professionals as one of the reasons that Blacks don't seek therapy. One doctor said a lot of his patients said things like, don't go talk to white folks about your business. We don't tell our business outside of the house. What happens in this house stays in this house. And those are things that have been passed down generationally. So, these are young parents in some cases who are in their 20s and 30s who are saying this, and they probably learned it from their parents in their 50s and 60s who learned it from their parents in their 70s and 80s. So, yes. How do we start to break some of that generational, misinformation about talking about our business outside the house, recognizing that, saying that, you had peas for dinner last night is not the same as going to seek help for a serious mental health issue.
Yes. Well, organizations like Pretty Brown Girl, they are talking about some dynamic things. I mean, listening to Dee, she's awesome and able to express the benefits of this organization, and it helps other students. Maybe when you first go in, like she said, she was shy, but she felt the energy in the room. And once you have that positive energy, or just understanding that people are being helped by talking about it, I think it helps us to talk more about it and help to normalize this discussion around mental health and around suicide, because it is a part of life. A lot of people have made that choice to end their life by suicide, and it's unfortunate, but it can be prevented. And if we as parents, as teachers, school counselors, whoever is around a young person throughout the day, we need to be able to recognize things and not be afraid to say something or think that, somebody else is going to handle that. Just share your observations, because it can save that child's life, especially when it comes to bullying. I mean, we hear all these different reports of parents who are advocating for their children, going to the school and making their concerns known, but the school is not doing anything. I suggest that parents take it a step further, going to these school board meetings where it's on record as well, not just a closed door office meeting with the principal, but going before the school board and sharing their concerns about things as well. And ultimately knowing that resources are available. My organization has my go-to mental health guide that is free and available. It's just to show people that there are resources that are available for people. And it's called My Go-To Mental Health Guide. And you can get it at CoryEmpowers.com.
Thank you for sharing that, Cory. And I agree. If you're not getting anywhere with your teacher, you're not getting anywhere with the principal, school board meeting, superintendent, and don't rule out the possibility of going to your local police station, because bullying, depending on what it is, can actually be a crime. Right. So documenting it with the police department, letting the school know that it's very serious. The sad part about Isabella's story is that her parents say that they did document it. They did try to tell the school, and it was ignored. And apparently the Department of Justice has gone into that school district in Utah, done an investigation, and found that the school has a history of ignoring complaints by Black and Asian parents about bullying. And now, as a result, I don't want to link them causally, but obviously something went wrong in that situation. A 10-year-old girl should not kill herself because of things that are happening at school. And obviously suicide is very complex. So I don't want to suggest that, it was solely because of what happened at school, but so alarming that the Department of Justice had to go in. We know that's not a normal occurrence. Thank you so much, Cory, for joining me this morning. Again, her book is #Driven. We're going to post more about your mental health nonprofit organization where people can get resources. Keep doing this work. Keep raising these issues. They are so, so important. And we need so many voices being lifted on this issue because you're right. Black folks kill themselves. And we've got to accept that, and we've got to do something about it.
And I just would like to leave 3 things with the audience. First, we talked about talking, but parents talking to their children. And if they don't feel comfortable talking, give them the option to write things down. Sometimes they're more willing to express things that way. Snoop around. I have always told my children, you have no expectation of privacy in my house. So, don't be afraid to snoop around and see what your child is into. And get help. Do not be ashamed to get help because help is available. And now we can call 988 instead of 911 for mental health crises or just a crisis situation that can be directly linked to services, and texting 741-741. Most any mental health organization is connected to that number locally in your area, and you can get help or just to know where you can go next.
Fantastic. Great information. Again, good to see you, my friend. Happy holidays to you as well.
Happy holidays.
All right. I want to thank all of my guests this morning. Such an important topic. We've got to talk about this stuff. We can't assume, as our guests have said, that somebody else is going to handle it. It's our responsibility as parents, as community leaders, as journalists, as talk show hosts, whatever your platform is. You probably know some kid and you have an obligation to make sure that that kid is okay. And this is not somebody else's problem. This is a problem that's happening right in our own community. So we, as community leaders, have an obligation to fix it. Again, if your child is having thoughts of suicide, if their behaviors is off, if their sleep patterns are off, if anything is off based on what you've heard today, don't be afraid to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's 1-800-TALK. Or as Cory just said, you can text to 741-741 and be connected to services. Our kids are our most important asset, and we have an incredible responsibility to make sure that their health and wellness is, our number one priority. Just some words to live by before I get out. Kids are gifts from God, plain and simple. They're gifts from God, and we have to treat them as the gifts that they are. And that means all of us lifting our voices, all of us taking action. If we see something, say something. If we see something, do something. The next child's life that we save might not be our own, but it may be a child that's close to us or a child that's close to someone else. Every child belongs to someone, and each and every one of us should be doing something to preserve that child's life. All right, y'all, I'm out. Wear your mask. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.